You sit down. Nothing urgent is happening. The work is done, or at least done enough. And instead of feeling relief, something else arrives. A low hum of unease, a sense that you should be doing something, that this stillness is somehow irresponsible, that you haven't quite earned this yet. So you pick up your phone, or you start making a mental list, or you find a small task that didn't need doing and do it anyway, just to have something to show for the last 20 minutes. Because resting, just resting, feels vaguely wrong in a way you can't fully explain. This isn't laziness. It isn't a personality flaw, and it has almost nothing to do with how much work you've actually done. What it is, and where it actually comes from, is a lot more specific than most people realize. Rest guilt isn't a modern invention. It isn't something that social media created or hustle culture installed in the last decade. The discomfort that arrives when you stop, really stop, goes much deeper than any trend. It's a nervous system response, and nervous system responses have origins. For most people who experience this, the guilt isn't actually about productivity. It isn't really about the undone tasks or the unread emails. It's about something that stillness triggers underneath all of that, a feeling that being still makes you visible in a way that being busy doesn't, that productivity is a kind of armor, and that without it, something might be required of you or taken from you that you're not quite sure you can handle. Understanding what that something is changes the whole experience of rest, not just intellectually, in the body where the guilt actually lives. Psychologist Harriet Braiker, whose work on the disease of the people pleaser shaped a generation of understanding about compulsive productivity, identified what she called the productivity trap, the way that staying busy functions not just as a means to an end, but as a strategy for managing anxiety. The doing isn't really about the tasks. It's about the feeling of forward motion, the sense that if you're moving, you're safe, and if you stop, the things you've been outrunning might catch up. What those things are varies, but research from psychologist Winch on emotional hygiene consistently points to the same underlying architecture. Rest guilt is almost never about rest itself. It's about what rest makes space for. Silence creates room for thoughts that busyness was keeping at bay, feelings that weren't processed because there was always something more urgent, questions about who you are when you're not useful, not productive, not contributing anything measurable to anyone. For many people, the roots of this go back to a very specific childhood experience, not necessarily a dramatic one, just the repeated message, explicit or atmospheric, that your value was conditional on your output, that love and approval arrived in response to achievement, to helpfulness, to being good at something, not simply for existing. And a child who receives that message, even subtly, even without anyone intending it, learns that stillness is not neutral. Stillness is where your value disappears. Researcher Kristin Neff, whose work on self-compassion has been studied across dozens of countries, found that people with high rest guilt consistently scored lower on what she called unconditional self-worth, the sense that you are enough regardless of what you produce. And critically, she found that this wasn't corrected by achievement. The more someone achieved, the more the threshold moved. The guilt didn't decrease with more productivity. It simply relocated to the next undone thing, because it was never really about the tasks to begin with. There's also a physiological layer that rarely gets discussed. The nervous system that learned hypervigilance, always scanning, always anticipating, never fully landing, doesn't simply switch off when external demands reduce. The activation persists. Rest feels uncomfortable not because something is wrong with the rest, but because the nervous system hasn't received the signal that it's safe to deactivate. Stillness without that signal doesn't feel like peace. It feels like waiting for something to go wrong. Here is the part worth sitting with honestly. Rest guilt, left unexamined, doesn't just make rest uncomfortable. It makes the people around you uncomfortable too. Because someone who cannot stop, who fills every quiet moment with tasks, who turns a shared evening into a to-do list, who is visibly restless every time the pace slows, communicates something to the people they love. That stillness is a problem, that being is not enough, that even in moments meant for connection, the underlying message is that something more productive should be happening. Children especially absorb this. They learn from the adults around them what rest means, whether it's safe, whether it's allowed, whether doing nothing is something you're ever entitled to. The rest guilt you carry doesn't stay with you. It gets transmitted in the texture of the environment you create for the people closest to you. There's also something worth naming about what chronic rest guilt does to the quality of work itself. Research on cognitive recovery, particularly the work of Alex Soojung-Kim Pang on rest as a performance variable, consistently shows that the brain's most creative and integrative processes happen during genuine recovery states. The insight that arrives in the shower, the solution that appears on a walk. These aren't accidents. They're the output of a mind that was finally allowed to stop directing and start integrating. Rest guilt doesn't just cost you peace, it costs you your best thinking. Here is what changes when rest guilt is finally understood rather than just pushed through. The guilt doesn't disappear immediately. That's not how nervous system patterns work. but something shifts in the relationship with it. Instead of the guilt being a signal that you should get up and do something, it becomes information about what's happening underneath. The guilt arrives, and instead of obeying it, you can get curious about it. What is the stillness making space for right now? What is it that busyness was managing? Not to fix it immediately, just to know it's there. Kristin Neff's research on self-compassion found that the single most effective intervention for rest guilt wasn't productivity optimization or better time management. It was treating yourself with the same quality of permission you would extend to someone you genuinely loved. If a person you cared about deeply sat down after a long week and felt guilty for resting, what would you say to them? Whatever that answer is, it's available to you too. It was always available. It just wasn't pointed inward. And there's something worth reclaiming about what rest actually is. Not the absence of productivity, not time you'll have to justify later. Rest is the state in which your nervous system processes what it has been through, integrates what it has learned, and prepares for what comes next. It is not time stolen from your life. It is part of how your life works. Your body has known this the whole time. The guilt was the only thing that didn't get the message. You are allowed to stop, not because you've earned it, because you were always allowed. The rule that said otherwise was never yours to begin with. If what we talked about today resonated, the unease that arrives when you stop, the productivity is armor, the threshold that keeps moving no matter how much you achieve, understanding where it came from is a real step. But the nervous system that learned to associate stillness with danger doesn't reorganize through insight alone. What helps it is structure, small, repeated, concrete experiences of stopping, deliberately, without justification, and finding that nothing catastrophic arrives. Not grand commitments to rest more, just daily, structured moments of choosing differently from the pattern that was installed before you had any say in it. And if this video finally explains something you felt your whole life but never had words for, subscribe. We do this every week.